Hello, 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 hello mga ka-explorer. Muli ito ang inyong kaibigan si Jeff the Blind Explorer. Ayan, medyo matagal-tagal pong natigil yung ating mga audio narration books na ina-upload. So ngayon, i-continue po natin siya. This time, dito na po tayo sa ating fourth President of the Republic of the Philippines. Ayan, sino kaya siya mga kaibigan? Wala pong iba mga kaibigan, siya po ay si former President Sergio Osmenia Sr. Ayan, the first Visayan President. Ayan, siya po ang unang Bisaya na naging Pangulo ng ating bansang Pilipinas mula 1944 hanggang 1946. Ayan, so alamin po natin ang kanyang naging kontribusyon sa ating pamahalaang Pilipinas at ang kanyang naging kasaysayan bilang Pangulo ng ating bansang Pilipinas. Ayan, ito po muli ang inyong kaibigan, si Jeff the Blind Explorer. Salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Sergio Osmenia, 4th President of the Philippines. This article is about former President of the Philippines. For the municipality, see Sergio Osmenia Sr., Zamboanga del Norte. For his son, see Sergio Osmenia Jr. For his grandson, see Sergio Osmenia III. In this Philippine name for natural children, there is no middle name nor paternal family name, but the surname is Osmenia. Sergio Osmenia Sr. CCLH Spanish. Sexto Osmea, Xio Osma, the 9th of September 1878 to the 19th of October 1961, was a Filipino politician who served as the 4th President of the Philippines from 1944 to 1946. He was Vice President under Manuel L. Quezon. Upon Quezon's sudden death in 1944, Osmenia succeeded him at age 65, becoming the oldest person to assume the Philippine presidency until Rodrigo Duterte took office in 2016 at age 71. A founder of the Nacionalista Party, Osmenia was also the first Visayan to become president. Quick facts: his excellent cycle, 4th President of the Philippines. Prior to his accession in 1944, Osmenia served as governor of Cebu from 1906 to 1907, member and first Speaker of the Philippine House of Representatives from 1907 to 1922, and senator from the 10th Senatorial District for 13 years, in which capacity he served as Senate President pro tempore. In 1935, he was nominated to be the running mate of Senate President Manuel L. Quezon for the presidential election that year. The duo were overwhelmingly re-elected in 1941. He was the patriarch of the prominent Osmenia family, which includes his son, former Senator Sergio Osmenia Jr., and his grandsons, former Senators Sergio Osmenia III and John Henry Osmenia, ex-Governor Lito Osmenia and former Cebu City Mayor Tomas Osmenia. Early life and career: Osmenia was born on the 9th of September 1878 in the then municipality of Cebu to a wealthy businessman Don Pedro Ligocioco and to Juana Osmenia y Suico, who was reportedly only 14 years of age at the time. Owing to the circumstances of his birth, the identity of his father had been a closely guarded family secret, surnamed Sanson. Although carrying the stigma of being an illegitimate child, Juana never married the father. He did not allow this aspect to affect his standing in society. The Osmenia family, a rich and prominent clan of Chinese-Filipino heritage with vast business interests in Cebu, warmed to him as he established himself as a prominent figure in local society. Osmenia received his elementary education at the Colegio de San Carlos and graduated in 1892. Osmenia continued his education in Manila, studying in San Juan de Letran College where he first met Manuel L. Quezon, a classmate of his, as well as Juan Samulong and Emilio Jacinto. He took up law at the University of Santo Tomas and was second place in the bar examination in 1903. He served on the war staff of General Emilio Aguinaldo as a courier and journalist. In 1900, he founded the Cebu newspaper, El Nuevo Dia English, The New Day, which lasted for 3 years. Public service in Cebu. When Cebu Governor Juan Climaco was sent as a member of the Board of Commissioners of the St. Louis Purchase Expedition, Osmenia was appointed acting governor. When Climaco returned, he was appointed as provincial fiscal. His stint there elevated him in politics when he was elected governor of Cebu in 1906. Congressional career. House of Representatives. While governor, he ran for a seat in the first Philippine Assembly inaugurated in 1907 and was elected as its first speaker. Osmenia was 29 years old and already the highest-ranking Filipino official. He and another provincial politician, Manuel L. Quezon of Tayabas, set up the Nacionalista Party as a foil to the Partido Federalista of Manila-based politicians. During his speakership, members of the Assembly sought to initiate policies that constantly clashed with the opinions of American superiors in the Philippine Commission that ultimately did not pass. 3 important bills from the Assembly were rejected by the Philippine Commission. The repeal of the sedition law, which imposed penalties on any Filipino who advocated independence, the repeal of the flag law, which banned display of the Filipino flag, the grant of more powers to the local governments. The Americans' authority did not stop the Assembly under him from initiating transformative legislation that would come to pass. These included the creation of a Council of State and a Board of Control that enabled the Philippine legislature to share some of the executive powers of the American Governor-General. Quezon Osmenia alliance. Osmenia was friends and classmates with Manuel Quezon, who was the majority floor leader under Osmenia's speakership. When the Jones Law was passed, Quezon was elected as Senate President and Osmenia remained Speaker. Senate. In 1922, Osmenia was elected to the Senate representing the 10th Senatorial District. He went to the United States as part of the OSROC's mission in 1933, to secure passage of the Hare-Hawes Cutting Independence Bill, which was superseded by the Tydings-McDuffie Act in March 1934. Vice Presidency. Osmenia as Vice President. In 1924, Quezon and Osmenia reconciled and joined forces in the Partido Nacionalista Consolidado against the threat of an emerging opposition from the Democrata Party. The reunited Nacionalista Party dominated the political scene until the second breakup, when the members polarized into pros and antis in 1934. Quezon and Osmenia again reconciled for the 1935 presidential election. In 1935, Quezon and Osmenia won the Philippines' first national presidential election under the banner of the Nacionalista Party. Quezon obtained nearly 68% of the vote against his 2 main rivals, Emilio Aguinaldo and Bishop Gregorio Aglipay. Citation needed. They were inaugurated on the 15th of November 1935. Quezon had originally been barred by the Philippine Constitution from seeking re-election. However, in 1940, constitutional amendments were ratified allowing him to seek re-election for a fresh term ending in 1943. In the 1941 presidential elections, Quezon was re-elected over former Senator Juan Sumulong with nearly 82% of the vote. Re-elected in 1941, Osmenia remained vice president during the Japanese occupation when the government was in exile. As vice president, Osmenia concurrently served as Secretary of Public Instruction from 1935 to 1940, and again from 1941 to 1944. The outbreak of World War II and the Japanese invasion resulted in periodic and drastic changes to the government structure. Executive Order 390, the 22nd of December 1941, abolished the Department of the Interior and established a new line of succession. Executive Order 396, the 24th of December 1941, further reorganized and grouped the cabinet, with the functions of Secretary of Justice assigned to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Quezon Osmenia impasse. By 1943, the Philippine government in exile was faced with a serious crisis. According to the amendments to the 1935 Constitution, Quezon's term was to expire on the 30th of December 1943, and Vice President Sergio Osmenia would automatically succeed him to serve out the remainder of term until 1945. This eventuality was brought to the attention of President Quezon by Osmeña himself, who wrote the former to this effect. Aside from replying to this letter informing Vice President Osmeña that it would not be wise and prudent to effect any such change under the circumstances, President Quezon issued a press release along the same line. Osmeña then requested the opinion of U.S. Attorney General Homer Cummings, who upheld Osmeña's view as more in keeping the law. Quezon, however, remained adamant. He accordingly sought President Franklin D. Roosevelt's decision. The latter chose to remain aloof from the controversy, suggesting instead that the Philippine officials themselves solve the impasse. A cabinet meeting was then convened by President Quezon. Aside from Quezon and Osmeña, others present in this momentous meeting were Resident Commissioner Joaquin Elizalde, Brigadier General Carlos P. Romulo, and Cabinet Secretaries Andres Soriano and Jaime Hernandez. Following a spirited discussion, the cabinet adopted Elizalde's opinion favoring the decision and announced his plan to retire in California. After the meeting, however, Vice President Osmeña approached the president and broached his plan to ask the U.S. Congress to suspend the constitutional provisions for presidential succession until after the Philippines should have been liberated. This legal way out was agreeable to President Quezon and the members of his cabinet. Proper steps were taken to carry out the proposal. Sponsored by Senator Tidings and Congressman Bell, the pertinent joint resolution number 95 was unanimously approved by the Senate on a voice vote and passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 181 to 107 on the 12th of November 1943. Presidency Quick Facts. Presidential styles of reference style. Osmeña became President of the Commonwealth on Quezon's death in 1944. He was sworn in by Associate Justice Robert Jackson in Washington, D.C. He returned to the Philippines the same year with General Douglas MacArthur and the Liberation Forces. After the war, Osmeña restored the Commonwealth government and the various executive departments. He continued the fight for Philippine independence. For the presidential election of 1946, Osmeña refused to campaign, saying that the Filipino people knew of his record of 40 years of honest and faithful service. He lost to Manuel Roxas, who won 54% of the vote and became President of the Independent Republic of the Philippines. Citation needed. Vice President Osmeña taking the oath of office to become the fourth President of the Philippines and the second President of the Philippine Commonwealth after the passing of Manuel Quezon. Administration and Cabinet. War Cabinet 1944-45. President Osmeña with members of his cabinet. Front row, left to right. Jaime Hernandez, Secretary of Finance. President Osmeña, Colonel Carlos P. Romulo, Resident Commissioner and Secretary of Information. Back row, left to right. Colonel Mariano A. Arana, Judge Advocate General of the Philippine Army and Secretary of the Department of Justice, Labor, and Welfare. Dr. Arturo B. Roeder, Secretary of Agriculture and Commerce. Ismael Mathay, Budget and Finance Commissioner. Colonel Alejandro Melchor, Undersecretary of National Defense, representing General Basilio Valdez, Secretary of National Defense. On the 8th of August 1944, President Osmeña issued Executive Order 15W reorganizing and consolidating the executive departments of the Commonwealth government. The reorganization of the government after it was re-established on Philippine soil was undertaken with Executive Order No. 27, the 27th of February 1945. Citation needed. Office name term President Sergio Osmeña 1944-1946 Secretary of Finance Jaime Hernandez the 24th of August 1944 to the 27th of February 1945 Secretary of National Defense and Communications Basilio Valdez the 1st of August 1944 to the 6th of February 1945. Secretary of Public Relations Carlos P. Romulo Concurrent Capacity 1944-1945 Secretary of Justice, Labor and Welfare Mariano A. Arana Acting Capacity 1944-1945 Secretary of Agriculture and Commerce. Manuel Nieto 1944-1945 Secretary to the President Arturo Roder 1944-1945 Resident Commissioner of the Philippines to the United States Congress Carlos P. Romulo 1944-1945 Budget and Finance Commissioner Ismael Mathay 1944-1945 Judge Advocate General of the Army Mariano Arana 1944-1945 Economic Advisor Urbano Zafra 1944-1945 Military Advisor Alejandro Melchor 1944-1945 Cabinet and Judicial Appointments 1945-46 Executive Order Number 27 the 27th of February 1945 was issued upon the restoration of civilian authority to the government of the Commonwealth, and members of the new cabinet appointed on the 8th of March 1945. Subsequent renaming and mergers of departments have separate listings. Office name term President Sergio Osmenia 1944-1946 Secretary of the Interior Tomas Confessor 1945 Secretary of Finance and Reconstruction Jaime Hernandez the 27th of February 1945 to the 27th of May 1946 Secretary of Justice, Agriculture and Commerce Delfin Harania February 1945 to December 1945 Secretary of Justice Ramon Quisambing the 28th of December 1945 to the 28th of May 1946 Secretary of Agriculture and Commerce Vicente Singson Encarnacion the 27th of February 1945 to the 28th of May 1946 Secretary of National Defense Tomas Cabili the 27th of February 1945 to the 11th of July 1945 Alfredo Montalbano Sr. the 12th of July 1945 to the 27th of May 1946 Secretary of Health and Public Welfare Basilio Valdez 1945 Jose Locsin 1945-1946 Secretary of Public Instruction Maximo Cala the 27th of February 1945 to the 4th of May 1945 Jose Reyes the 5th of May 1945 to the 7th of January 1946 Francisco Benitez the 7th of January 1946 to the 27th of May 1946 Secretary of Public Works and Communications Sotero Cabahug 1945-1946 Secretary of the Budget Ismael Mathay 1944-1945 Secretary to the President Jose S. Reyes 1945-1946 Secretary of Labor Marcelo Aduru 1946 Resident Commissioner of the Philippines to the United States Congress Carlos P. Romulo 1945-1946 Commissioner of the Office of Foreign Relations Vicente G. Cinco 1945-1946 Liberation off Leyte, October 1944 Left to right Lieutenant General George Kenny, Lieutenant General Richard K. Sutherland, President Sergio Osmenia, General Douglas MacArthur President Sergio Osmenia together with General Douglas MacArthur during the historic landing at Leyte in 1944. Osmenia accompanied U.S. General Douglas MacArthur during the landing of U.S. forces in Leyte on the 20th of October 1944, starting the liberation of the Philippines during the Second World War. Upon establishing the beachhead, MacArthur immediately transferred authority to Osmenia, the successor of Manuel Quezon, as Philippine Commonwealth President. Domestic policies Restoration of the Commonwealth with Manila liberated, General of the Army, Douglas MacArthur, on behalf of the United States, turned over the reins of government of the Philippines to Commonwealth President, Sergio Osmenia, on the 27th of February 1945, amidst brief, but impressive, ceremonies held at the Malacañang Palace. President Osmenia, after thanking the United States through General MacArthur, announced the restoration of the government of the Commonwealth of the Philippines and worked out the salvation of the Philippines from the ravages of war. Government reorganization President Osmenia proceeded with the immediate reorganization of the government and its diverse dependencies. On the 8th of April 1945, he formed his cabinet, administering the oath of office to its component members. Later, President Osmenia received the Council of State to help him solve the major problems confronting the nation. Government offices and bureaus were gradually re-established. A number of new ones were created to meet needs then current. Also restored were the Supreme Court of the Philippines and the inferior courts. The Court of Appeals was abolished and its appellate jurisdiction was transferred to the Supreme Court, the members of which were increased to 11, 1 Chief Justice and 10 Associate Justices, in order to attend to the new responsibilities. Slowly but steadily, as the liberating forces freed the other portions of the country, provincial and municipal governments were established by the Commonwealth to take over from the military authorities. Rehabilitation of the Philippine National Bank. Following the restoration of the Commonwealth government, Congress was reorganized. Manuel Roxas and Elpidio Quirino were elected Senate President and Senate President pro tempore, respectively. In the House of Representatives, Jose Zaleta of Iloilo was elected Speaker and Prospero Sanidad as Speaker pro tempore. The opening session of the Congress was personally addressed by President Osmenia, who reported on the Commonwealth government in exile and proposed vital pieces of legislation. The first Commonwealth Congress earnestly took up the various pending assignments to solve the pressing matters affecting the Philippines, especially in regard to relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. The first bill enacted was Commonwealth Act No. 672 rehabilitating the Philippine National Bank. People's Court yielding to American pressure. On the 25th of September 1945, the Congress enacted CA No. 682 creating the People's Court and the Office of Special Prosecutors to deal with the pending cases of collaboration. Foreign Policies. President Osmenia and his family strolling in the Malacañang Palace Gardens. United Nations Charter. President Osmenia sent the Philippine delegation, which was headed by Carlos P. Romulo, to the San Francisco gathering for the promulgation of the Charter of the United Nations on the 26th of June 1945. Other members of the delegation were Maximo Cala, Carlos P. Garcia, Pedro Lopez, Francisco Delgado, Urbano Zafra, Alejandro Melchor, and Vicente Cinco. The 28th signatory nation of the United Nations, the Philippines was one of the 51 nations that drafted the UN Charter. Once approved by Philippine delegation, the UN Charter was ratified by the Congress of the Philippines and deposited with the U.S. State Department on the 11th of October 1945. Foreign Relations Office. To prepare for the forthcoming independent status of the Philippines, President Osmenia created the Office of Foreign Relations. Vicente Cinco was appointed as its first commissioner, with cabinet rank. In this connection, President Osmenia also entered into an agreement with the United States government to send 5 Filipino trainees to the U.S. State Department to prepare themselves for diplomatic service. They were sent by U.S. State Department to the United States embassies in Moscow and Mexico City and consulates in Saigon and Singapore. International banking. On the 5th of December 1945, President Osmenia appointed Resident Commissioner Carlos P. Romulo as his representative to accept Philippine membership in the International Monetary Fund and in the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which bodies had been conceived in the Bretton Woods Agreement, in which the Philippines had also taken part. Romulo signed said membership on the 27th of December 1945 on behalf of the Philippines. Bell Trade Act. On the 30th of April 1946, the United States Congress, at last, approved the Bell Act, which as early as the 20th of January had been reported to the Ways and Means Committee of the lower house, having been already passed by the Senate. President Osmenia and Resident Commissioner Romulo had urged the passage of this bill, with United States High Commissioner, Paul V. McNutt, exerting similar pressure. The act gave the Philippines 8 years of free trade with the United States, then 20 years during which tariffs would be upped gradually until they were in line with the rest of the American tariff policy. The law also fixed some quotas for certain products: sugar 850,000 long tons, cordage 6 million pounds, coconut oil 200,000 long tons, cigars 200 million pounds. This aid was coupled with that to be obtained from the recently passed Tidings Damage Bill, which provided some $900 million for payment of war damages, of which $1 million was earmarked to compensate for church losses. The sum of $240 million was to be periodically allocated by the United States President as goodwill. Also, 60 million pieces of surplus property were transferred to the Philippines government. 1946 Presidential Election Main article. 1946 Philippine presidential election. Soon after the reconstitution of the Commonwealth government in 1945, Senators Manuel Roxas, Elpidio Quirino and their allies called for an early national election to choose the President and Vice President of the Philippines and members of the Congress. In December 1945, the House Insular Affairs of the United States Congress approved the joint resolution setting the date of the election on no later than the 30th of April 1946. Prompted by this congressional action, President Sergio Osmenia called the Philippine Congress to a 3-day special session. Congress enacted Commonwealth Act No. 725, setting the date of the election on the 23rd of April 1946. The act was signed by President Osmenia on the 5th of January 1946. 3 parties presented their respective candidates for the different national elective positions. These were the Nacionalista Party, Conservative Osmenia wing, the Liberal wing of the Nacionalista Party and the Partido Modernista. The Nacionalistas had Osmenia and Senator Eulogio Rodriguez as their candidates for President and Vice President, respectively. The Modernistas chose Hilario Camino Moncado and Luis Salvador for the same positions. The standard bearers of the Liberals were Senators Manuel Roxas and Elpidio Quirino. On the 3rd of January 1946, President Osmenia announced his re-election bid. On the 22nd of January 1946, Eulogio Rodriguez was nominated as Osmenia's running mate for vice president, in a convention held at Ciro's Club in Manila. According to the Manila Chronicle, the convention opened at 10:15 in the morning when the acting secretary of the party, Vicente Farmaso, called the confab to order. Congressman Jose C. Romero, who delivered the keynote speech, accused Senate President Manuel Roxas and his followers of fanning the flames of discontent among the people, of capitalizing on the people's hardship, and of minimizing the accomplishment of the Osmenia administration. These men with the Messiah complex have been the bane of the country and of the world. This is the mentality that produces Hitlers and the Mussolinis, and their desire to climb to power. They even want to destroy the party which placed them where they are today. Senator Carlos P. Garcia, who delivered the nomination speech for President Sergio Osmenia, made a long recital of Osmenia's achievements, his virtues as public official and as private citizen. A statue of President Osmenia in front of the Osmenia Museum in Cebu City. Entering the convention hall at about 7:30 p.m., President Osmenia, accompanied by the Committee on Notification, was greeted with rounds of cheer and applause as he ascended the platform. President Osmenia delivered his speech, which was a general outline of his future plans once elected. He emphasized that as far as his party is concerned, independence is a close issue. It is definitely coming on the 4th of July 1946. On the 19th of January 1946, Senator Roxas announced his candidacy for president in a convention held in Santa Ana Cabaret in Manila. According to the Manila Chronicle, more than 3,000 by conservative estimate, there were only 1,000 plus delegates, party members and hero worshippers jammed into suburban, well-known Santa Ana Cabaret, biggest in the world, to acclaim ex-Katipunero and Bagong Katipunan organizer Manuel Acuña Roxas as the guidon-bearer of the Nacionalista Party's liberal wing. The delegates, who came from all over the islands, met in formal convention from 10:50 a.m. and did not break up till about 5:30 p.m. They elected 1. Mariano J. Cuenco, professional Osmaniaphobe, as temporary chairman. 2. Jose Avellino and ex-pharmacist Antonio Zacarias permanent chairman and secretary, respectively. 3. Nominated 44 candidates for senators. 4. Heard the Generalissimo himself deliver an oratorical masterpiece consisting of 50% attacks against the Osmenia administration, 50% promises, pledges. Rabid Roxasites greeted the Roxas acceptance speech with hysterical applause. A split developed among the members of the Nacionalista Party over issues. Citation needed. President Osmenia tried to prevent the split in the Nacionalista Party by offering Senator Roxas the position of Philippine Regent Commissioner to the United States, but Roxas turned down the offer. A new political organization was born, the liberal wing of the Nacionalista Party, which would later become the Liberal Party of the Philippines. The election was generally peaceful except in some places, especially in the province of Pampanga. According to a controversial decision of the Electoral Tribunal of the House of Representatives in Melitón Solomon versus Luis Taruc, Pampanga was under the terroristic clutches and control of the Hukbalahaps. So terrorized were the people of a riot. At one time, 200 persons abandoned their homes, their work, and their food, all their belongings in a mass evacuation to the poblacion due to fear and terror. Citation needed. A total of 2,218,847 voters went to the polls to elect a president and vice president, who were to be the Commonwealth's last and the Republic's first. 4 days after Election Day, the Liberal Party candidates were proclaimed victors. Roxas registered an overwhelming majority of votes in 34 provinces and 9 cities: Abra, Agusan, Albay, Antique, Bataan, Batanes, Batangas, Bukidnon, Bulacan, Cagayan, Camarines Norte, Camarines Sur, Capiz, Cavite, Cotabato, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, Isabela, Laguna, La Union, Leyte, Marinduque, Mindoro, Misamis Oriental, Negros Occidental, Nueva Vizcaya, Palawan, Pangasinan, Rizal, Romblon, Samar, Sorsogon, Sulu, Surigao, Tayabas, Zambales, Manila, Quezon City, Bacolod, Negros Occidental, Iloilo City, Iloilo, Baguio, Mountain Province, Zamboanga City, Zamboanga, Tagaytay, Cavite, Cavite City, Cavite, and San Pablo City, Laguna. The Liberal Party won 9 out of 16 contested seats in the Philippine Senate and in the House of Representatives. The Liberals won a majority with 50 seats, while the Nacionalistas and the Democratic Alliance winning 33 and 6 seats, respectively. Citation needed. Post-presidency and death tomb of Sergio Osmenia. After his electoral defeat, Osmenia retired to his home in Cebu. He died of pulmonary edema at age 83 on the 19th of October 1961 at the Veterans Memorial Medical Center in Quezon City. He was buried at Manila North Cemetery, Manila on the 26th of October 1961. Personal life. Family. On the 10th of April 1901, he married Estefania Chiong Veloso. The couple had 10 children: Nicasio Veloso Osmenia, Vicenta Veloso Osmenia, Edilberto Veloso Osmenia, Milagros Veloso Osmenia, Emilio Veloso Osmenia, Maria Paloma Veloso Osmenia, Jesus Veloso Osmenia, Teodoro Veloso Osmenia, Jose Veloso Osmenia, and Sergio Veloso Osmenia Jr. In 1920, 2 years after the death of his first wife, Osmenia married Esperanza Limjap. The couple had 3 more children, namely, Ramon Limjap Osmenia, Rosalina Limjap Osmenia, and Victor Limjap Osmenia. Circular reference. Descendants. Several of Osmenia's descendants became prominent political figures in their own right. Sergio Osmenia Jr., son and former Senator Sergio Osmenia III, grandson and former Senator John Henry Osmenia, grandson, former Congressman, former Senator, and former Mayor of Toledo, Cebu. Tomas Osmenia, grandson, former Mayor of Cebu City, former Congressman Emilio Mario Osmenia, grandson and former Governor of Cebu. Rogelio Veloso Osmenia, grandson and former Councilor of Cebu City. Renato Veloso Osmenia, grandson and former Vice Mayor of Cebu City. Notes. Until 1945, Laurel served as President of the Second Philippine Republic, while Osmenia served as the President of the government in exile. As Secretary of Public Instruction, Health, and Public Welfare as Secretary of Public Instruction as Secretary of Justice, Labor and Welfare as Secretary of Health and Public Welfare as Secretary of Public Instruction and Information. The position was last held by Americans, including Fred Atkinson, the first general superintendent. References external links about this article. View edit history updated 35 days ago. View talk page discuss improvements to this article. Read more. First Philippine legislature. The first Philippine legislature was the first session of the Philippine legislature, the first representative legislature of the Philippines. Then known as the Philippine Islands, the Philippines under the sovereign control of the United States through the insular government. The Philippine legislature consisted of an appointed upper house, the Philippine Commission, and an elected lower house, the Philippine Assembly. These bodies were the predecessors of the Philippine Senate and Philippine House of the Philippine Congress. First Congress of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. The First Congress of the Commonwealth of the Philippines, also known as the Post-War Congress, and the Liberation Congress, refers to the meeting of the bicameral legislature composed of the Senate and House of Representatives, from 1945 to 1946. The meeting only convened after the re-establishment of the Commonwealth of the Philippines in 1945, when President Sergio Osmenia called it to hold 5 special sessions. Osmenia had replaced Manuel L. Quezon as president after the former died in exile in the United States in 1944. Nacionalista Party political party in the Philippines. Content is available under CC by SA 3.0 unless otherwise noted. View article in browser.